So hopefully we can kind of go back to the context that we had 30 minutes ago. I know that was a pretty deep technical topic, but we wanted to unpack some of those questions here with our panel today. So before I get into questions, would love to just give each of you an opportunity to introduce yourselves and your project. So why don't we start with you, John?
I'm Jayant. I'm the CTO of Douro Labs, and we're building Pyth Network, which is a high-frequency market data oracle. But in this talk, we're going to talk a little bit more about some Orderflow auction work that we've been doing recently.
I'm Lucas, co-founder and CEO of Jito Labs. We build high-performance MEV infrastructure for Solana and also run a liquid staking protocol.
My name is Nitesh. I'm the CEO and founder of dFlow. We build Solana DeFi primitives and low latency infrastructure that helps liquidity on the Solana network.
All right, so we'll kick it off with what I would think is an easy question, but let's see if you guys agree. Can you eliminate MEV?
I think the answer to this question is no. I think you can restructure how it works, and I think you can probably determine different participants getting different shares, right, by different mechanisms. But it's sort of a fundamental property of nature, I think, so it's not really possible to eliminate.
Do you want to talk about some of the attempts to mitigate it or eliminate it and like what the second order consequences were? That might be helpful as well. Lucas might have something on that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's possible to eliminate MEV. It's also such an overloaded term at this point. A lot of people say that some will say arbitrage is MEV, some won't. Some will say like backrunning Oracle updates like from Pyth is MEV, some don't. But overall, like if there's money on the floor, people are going to pick it up, and it just depends who picks it up. And going back to Tushar's slide, there's a few different layers where like Jito's kind of at the lower end of the layer, and then I would say like Pyth is in the middle somewhere, and Nitesh is kind of up at the top. And I think that there's you can try to eliminate it, and we try to eliminate it at like the infrastructure layer. And given all the trading and meme coin trading on Solana, it's a cat and mouse game on trying to kind of eliminate the bad types of MEV. So we see a lot of newer DeFi protocols like dFlow that are kind of coming online that should help kind of move this up the stack more towards the users instead of the validators and stakers.
Yeah, I think eliminating MEV is probably not possible, but it's also just a question of definitions. I think as a very simple example, you can set 5% slippage, and you can set 50 bips of slippage, and in the latter case, you'll have less MEV that's extracted. So it just kind of depends, but I don't think fundamentally you can get around the problem and deterministically solve it with some closed form solution.
All right, so I want to talk a little bit about conditional liquidity or order flow segmentation. So Nitesh, we'll kick it off with you, but if anyone else wants to chime in as well. Like I said in the presentation, we already have a form of order flow segmentation through the use of off-chain auctions. And then, we already have this in TradFi with Robinhood and Citadel, where Robinhood users are getting their orders filled by Citadel, and the spreads are actually tighter in that case, not worse. Robinhood's not ripping off their users, they're giving them a better price. But maybe the prices could be even better, right? Because right now it's not competitive, there's only a handful of market makers who can compete. And as far as I know, dFlow is the first instantiation of order flow segmentation and an open order book. Are there any other examples of this in TradFi that I might have missed, or elsewhere? And then, what do you think would be the externalities to the Solana network if conditional liquidity becomes the dominant paradigm?
Yeah, so order flow segmentation is something that exists not just in traditional finance, but like in markets spanning back centuries. I think one of the promises of DeFi and crypto in general has been that it makes things more open, more permissionless, and a natural consequence of this is just more competition, and more competition, leads to all sorts of positive externalities, as you're asking. So some of those are just increased liquidity, tighter spreads for users of the network who are trying to transact, deeper and more resilient order books, and all of these kind of interact with each other in creating positive feedback loops. If there are tighter spreads on chain, more markets will move on chain. If more markets are on chain, more market participants will participate in the rest of DeFi, borrow lend protocols. And this loops back to just having more assets of consequence on chain. So it does exist in traditional finance. I think examples of this are centralized RFQs with market maker last looks. There are certain centralized exchanges that do retail-only quoting. These are all forms of conditional liquidity, but nothing has existed up till now in the same form factor that we're trying to build conditional liquidity, and I think it's going to make a pretty big difference on Solana. Yeah.
How have those worked in the other examples that you're talking about? These certain exchanges that only quote retail. Is that working?
It works for kind of the limited use cases that they've been applied to. I think they've all been applied in a very niche way, targeting like a specific vertical of the market. And payment for order flow is the canonical example in U.S. equities markets, which has worked in providing U.S. investors with tighter spreads. But again, you lack the transparency and competition that I think, one, requires crypto, and two, requires a network like Solana, which is fast and cheap and parallel.
So Lucas, I have a question for you next. In the presentation, I mentioned the recent proposal that was put forward for the Jito DAO to take 3% of the tips that go through your block building infrastructure. Given that tips are a really significant part of the revenue of Solana, and that revenue ultimately ends up going to validators and stakers, how do you think about balancing two competing pieces of the need to maximize revenue versus creating opportunity for a competing block builder who takes lower fees?
Yeah. I think I guess backing up, Jito is basically another scheduler for building blocks on Solana. And so you have the normal scheduler that's kind of sequencing and ordering these transactions, and then Jito runs a different, essentially, algorithm for that. And the tips for those, the people are paying Jito to kind of accelerate their transactions and land on chain fast. And the main difference between this and priority fees is that the priority fees on Solana today, 50% of them are burned. So it's kind of this like weird incentive where it's like, if I'm a validator, do I want someone to use this thing where 50% is burned, or do I want to take some other system where like I get 100% of it? And then also priority fees today are not distributed to stakers. So if you're staking to a validator, then that's getting a lot of priority fees. Those are all going to the validator. And so the tip system that Jito built that's running on chain, it's processing like 10 or more $1 million a day for the last day or two. Is all that money is flowing to stakers and validators. So it's basically a value add over priority fees because it's going to stakers. And we spent a lot of money and R&D on building these algorithms, and block building is kind of like our bread and butter at this point. And we're doubling the fees on the network. So given all that, I think that a fee is okay to take. Obviously, we don't want the fee to be super high because then it does incentivize competitors, but this is kind of one of those businesses that has really large network effects. It took a really long time to build it, and a lot of, you actually have to go to every single validator in the beginning, say like, hey, can you run this? Solana was, essentially on Life Alert last year. So that was really hard. And now it's like we built up all the brand recognition and trust in validators. So I think that goes a long way. And then, making them a lot of money and trying to help the network run more efficiently certainly helps.
I think one thing that would be interesting to dive into deeper with regards to Jito and revenue and the MEV stack is just the variety of products that you have. You have this product portfolio, and there's some opportunities there for cross-selling and such.
Yeah.
You want to talk a little bit about how those play together?
Yeah. So in the very, very early days, I think the pitch was kind of like when we initially pitched Tushar and Kyle, it was about kind of like order flow and, basically making users' trades more efficient, giving them money back. And then we kind of saw what happened with Flashbots, where they had this huge network effect and, essentially got to a large amount of Ethereum stake and started making the network a lot of money. So we kind of went in that direction. And then I think we were on a call with these guys and they're like, have you thought about doing a liquid staking token? People want, if you're staking, you want to have high yield and, support validators that are making the network more efficient. So then Jito launched a liquid staking protocol in 2022. It's currently the largest one. It has around 45% of market share on Solana. And then, so that really complemented the MEV side well, because the MEV software generates additional yield for stakers. I think today it's around 2% incremental yield. So base staking yield is 8%. Jito's adds another 2%, so it's around 10% today. And then earlier this year, we released a restaking protocol. And, restaking has gotten a lot of hype on Ethereum. I think people try to make it sound a little smarter and complicated than it is, but it's essentially a way that you can stake tokens, stake LSTs like Jito Sol, stake governance tokens, Bitcoin, whatever, to essentially this platform that can help decentralize operations. And so the JIP, the Jito improvement proposal that you're talking about is kind of us trying to dog food the restaking stack by decentralizing a piece of the MEV stack. And that will kind of, assuming the proposal goes through, it will redirect some of the tips to the restakers that are securing the essentially calculation and management of the MEV tips on Solana.
All right, so something more relatable maybe to this audience.
Yeah. All right.
I've got a question for you.
Yeah. It's a triangle, and all these things.
So look, there's a lot of Sol in this room, right?
Pull me out.
We've done a lot of in-kind distributions of Sol in the past. A bunch of people here have held on to their Sol. If they want to get some of these MEV yields, how should they choose a validator? What should they do? Should they use Jito Sol? What can you give a suggestion for the regular person in the room who has a bunch of Sol?
Yeah. Let me zoom out here a little bit. There's you want to be staking to if you want to get MEV, you want to be staking to a validator running the Jito Solana client. There's 1,100 validators doing that today, 90% of stake. So there's a good chance that you're doing that already. Everyone from Coinbase is running it if you're using them for custody. Jito Labs also runs a few validators if you want to help support our company and help us build this software. And then if you want another route, if you don't want to worry about what validator it's staked to, maybe you want liquidity, is that you can use Jito Sol, which essentially takes your stake Sol and wraps it into a liquid token. And so, you have this liquid version of the Sol that you've staked, and then the Jito protocol is kind of managing where that stake goes. So it's automatically selecting validators and moving stake around so that your stake is optimized. So there's a few different paths that you can go from just normal staking to liquid staking.
All right, so Jayant, last year we announced our Pyth investment. And in that post, we talked about how Pyth was positioned to compete in the MEV market, though at the time we called it OEV. Can you talk a little bit about the advantages that Pyth offers to front ends like wallets and DeFi applications who want to make revenue from order flow auctions?
Yeah, so maybe to take a step back and just kind of think about kind of how we ended up here, because I know there was this post about OEV, and we were actually thinking about this. The concept of OEV was you can, oracles put prices on chain and you can backrun them, and it's very similar to MEV. But we actually thought about this from sort of first principles, and we realized we kind of had a framework that's actually very similar to what Tushar presented today, where there's kind of different types of MEV originated from users or from effectively changes in the world, because those affect the prices of assets. And we realized that the right thing to build is actually a generic order flow auction primitive. So this is essentially a marketplace where users or dApps can come and place orders to say, I want to sell this collateral at this price, and then market makers effectively bid to fill those orders. And it's sort of a payment for order flow model. So whatever they bid ends up being like a rebate that goes either to the protocol or the wallet or whatnot. And so we're basically launching a generic marketplace, and this is something that front ends like Phantom Wallet or things like that can integrate in order to basically send their user trades to the order flow auction. And this actually has a lot of benefits for both the users and the wallet. The benefit for the users is they get predictable pricing, like upfront. You know what the price of the trade is going to be. It's not like trading on a market maker where there's going to be slippage and it's just uncertain. And the second thing is the wallet actually gets revenue because it is this payment for order flow model. Whatever the market makers bid in that auction ends up going back to Phantom in this case. And Phantom can redistribute some of that to the user. They can keep some of that as revenue. It's very analogous to like what Robinhood does today in the traditional markets. So that's kind of how it works for someone like a front end who wants to just do trading. There's also opportunities for dApps like lending protocols and things like that to route liquidation orders through this, which basically gives them much more competitive pricing on the liquidations than they get today. And they pay actually really giant margins for these liquidations, like they're priced at like a 5% discount to market or something. So there's actually a lot of like savings, cost savings that these protocols can get. On the on like the market making side, the great thing about having sort of a single marketplace is there's a network effect, right? And so if you're a market maker, what you really want is access to order flow from a bunch of different sources, and you want non-toxic order flow, right? You want retail orders, you want these really poorly priced liquidations, right? Those are all great opportunities for you if you're trading. So we basically have a one-stop shop for the market makers, which is a great prop for them.
I know you were working on a bunch of institutional integrations. Do you want to talk about some of the contributors to the Pyth network?
Yeah, so Pyth network, our kind of core product are these real-time market data feeds, and we have a network of major financial institutions who provides all the data. So this is like Jane Street and like Binance and all the crypto exchanges and a bunch of the TradFi firms. And one of the things that we wanted to do when we were launching this order flow auction is we can actually leverage a lot of those relationships to basically have the same people compete in the order flow auction. So for our order flow auction product, we actually have some of the top on-chain market makers like Wintermute and Oros and Flow Traders, who are basically the majority of the volume everywhere, who are already onboarded onto the platform today.
Where do you think the future of DeFi order matching will happen? Is it going to be mostly off-chain auctions, whether they're bundles or order flow auctions, or will it be mostly on-chain matching with order flow segmentation? And why do you think one of these will win more market share than the other? I don't think it's going to be a 100%, 0% in any version of the world. It's obviously going to be a blend. But where do you think the majority of it is going to happen? And why don't we start from Nitesh and come this way?
Yeah, so I think it's primarily going to happen on chain. I think one of the promises and true to the ethos of Solana is to stick to the L1 and kind of there are all sorts of benefits you get there with composability, atomicity. Doing the matching on chain behind consensus is probably a more difficult technical challenge than moving it to an off-chain auction. But in my view, it has kind of the most positive externalities for the network and market participants because it would be behind consensus and therefore the most transparent system. So I'm very bullish that direction. And I think with future research efforts that will happen and are currently happening, have been happening for years, like multiple concurrent proposers or leaders, this sort of future makes more sense. So that's where dFlow is building.
I think most of it will happen on chain as well. I think that there's certainly a time and place for off-chain auctions, but Solana's doing a few hundred or 1,000 user transactions per second, and maybe it might be kind of hard to do it at this moment in time, but with FireDancer and some of the other presentations you'll see later, the tech on Solana is getting much better. So I think we'll see more and more of that move on chain.
I'm actually going to take the other position on this, and I'm going to say it's mostly going to happen off-chain. And the reason I'm going to say that is because I think there are just core limits to what you can do on the blockchain because of the fact that you have to pay to transact. And there are going to be, more restrictions on the number of transactions or messages per second you can send. So if you compare that's inherent in having a decentralized blockchain, right? It's a distributed system. It is going to be less efficient than running a matching engine on a single computer. That is just, there is no way around that, right? There's like the speed of light. It's a physical limitation. And the pricing that you will get on a slower moving system like a blockchain is worse than what you will get on a faster moving system because that's just how finance works, right? There's a reason that the HFTs care about, latency so much, right? It allows them to quote tighter. And so at the end of the day, I think if you want to get the best pricing, you have to have a system that is fast. And the only way to have a fast system is to make it off-chain, right? That can still settle on-chain. It could be something like a roll-up or something like that. But ultimately, like the order books and things like that will not live on the blockchain.
All right, so we have some disagreement amongst the panelists, which I think is a good thing. It tells us we don't know all the answers. Listen, I know for everyone in the audience, my presentation in this panel, fairly technical. Please do ask us questions afterwards. We'll be around. We're here for y'all. So ask us questions. I do think this is one of the more impactful topics for valuations for the biggest assets in our ecosystem. So that's why we've devoted so much time on it, even though I know it's not the most relatable or easily understandable topic for the majority of people in the room. So really appreciate your patience and attention as we go through this. Thank you all. And with that, I'd like to welcome Matt Sword on stage, who's going to give a presentation about Solana.